Everyone, we're going to get started because we only have an hour today. Several of us have another call at 11, and I also realize that many of you probably are going to be starting your Thanksgiving holidays real soon here, so we appreciate everyone joining. Stacy, do you need to do any roll calls, or are you good with anybody?
Good.
Okay. So, anything you want to add in the opening for today?
No, I think we can just move on to the recharge policy, and if we want to consider this today, consider the policy that was sent out and any changes, and have it for full approval at the December 7th meeting. So today's our day to finish it up.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump into the recharge policy, and we're going to spend 99% of the time on that. I do want to give you guys a quick update on the groundwater sustainability plans. We are still working on those on the Thule side with Tom Harder and the folks at Four Creeks. We have some ongoing discussions on how the subsidence issues should be handled. There is some disagreement between our team and their team, definitely on the subsidence issue. We think that they're limiting it to too small an area, and it needs to be addressed over the entire sub-basin. But we literally, at 1 o'clock today, are meeting with them to have some additional discussions and with the team. The Tulare Lake side continues on. Some of you probably attended the Tulare Lake workshop that the State Water Board put on earlier in the month, and there were some really good comments. Really appreciated the fact that several folks from the Thule sub-basin also showed up in support of Tulare Lake. I think it's important to see what the state is planning. A lot of what we're seeing in Tulare Lake is going to end up, very likely ended up on the comment letter that Thule will eventually receive, and that may be as early as next month that Thule might receive that. So I think having the representation of that Tulare Lake meeting was important. So just some very quick update. We'll have some more information to share with the board on the 7th meeting. All right, let's jump into the recharge policy. I know you didn't have a lot of time to review this. We've put this together, but I wanted to walk you through a few things. And of course, as you're trying to get something out, you always capture, the minute you hit the send button, you realize, there's a typo or I'm looking at that adopted on the first sentence there, and I realize
Oh, yeah.
it's capitalized. So invariably, the minute you hit the send button, you're like, you see all these errors. So there's a few typos and other.
That's the only thing.
No, Mike, that's not the only thing.
The little thing.
Yeah. No, that wasn't the only thing. So let me walk you through the policy, some of the changes that have been made in the policy since our last meeting a month ago, and talk to everybody about it, and then I'm going to open it up for all kinds of comments and concerns to be brought up. One of the things specifically, again, the purpose of the policy is to encourage recharge. I think that's one of the things that we need to say right up front. The other item that I want to make sure that everybody's aware is that the policy is likely to be, well, not more than likely, very, very, very likely to be updated over time. One of the obvious issues with this policy is that right now our allocation policy does not differentiate between above and below, pumping above and below the clay. And when the groundwater extraction and allocation policy starts to do that, this recharge policy will need to mirror that as well. So if you're recharging above the clay, that will go to one, credits above the clay and not necessarily below the clay in the future. All right. I got a nod from Carlos, so that's a good sign that I'm following, you know, he's following me. But that is a future issue. I just bringing it up because I want everyone to be aware that that is very likely a change that is going to occur over the next few years to this policy. A couple of other significant changes. One of the things that we basically we said is that we did an item number 5 in the recharge and banking credits. Originally, we had it as the recharge credits would expire after 5 years, and that was removed, so that any recharge credits that you have until you use those recharge credits are going to still be in place. Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody understands that the recharge credits right now do not expire. The other significant change is I added section 7, which is the provisions for land that is not currently in ag production. I added the fact that FloodMar, you know, so that you can apply this, this groundwater credits to land that is currently in production if you're putting it in between rows, and it is in production right now. However, we use the language from the governor's EO, which says that recharge is not permitted on any ag field where pesticide or fertilizer application has occurred within the prior 30 days. And again, going back to the GSP comments that I made a little bit earlier, State Water Board has taken a very expansive view of the GSA's responsibility for groundwater quality. We are essentially responsible now for all kinds of groundwater issues. Any groundwater quality issues is essentially the responsibility, and to use Dennis Mills' word, the liability of the GSA. But groundwater quality is something that we want to be very sensitive to. And the state specifically has pointed out their concerns about recharge in areas that have and are pushing other kind of contaminants down into groundwater. So that's why, using their language from the executive order, I added that to item number 7.
Let me raise the issue on that there, because in CV salts, we dealt with a lot of that nitrate stuff. And I'm happy with this 30-day period, but when we were looking at that and balancing that with comments we were getting from the environmental folks, I'll pick on like the dairies, the manure it breaks down. It takes a while for all that to break down, and so if you're gotten on a field that's had manure application, we may have some criticism over that, just because it takes, some of it say 2-3 years even, depends on how much tonnage they put on there. And I don't know if that holds true with some of the other fertilizers, but we were getting a lot of those comments back on, how much fertilizer are you guys actually putting on, and it's more the degree of how much you put on versus, the time period on it.
Mike, were those issues resolved as part of CV Salts? Could we refer back to guidance documents from CV Salts instead, for some of these issues, so that we can mirror and basically be in parallel with CV Salts?
Well, that's why they put that, the nitrate management plan in place, so that a lot of that monitoring was taking place. So, we could look at the criteria in the nitrate management plan that the farmers are filling out.
Right.
Generically, this, if we can do this and this will pass the test, I have no problem with this, but I'm just wondering, you know, if people are gonna dig deep on this one or not.
The groundwater quality is something, you know this better than anybody, but the State Water Board obviously is very focused on groundwater quality.
Yeah.
So it has come to the forefront, and I think we need to have some language in here specific to limitations to make sure that we're not impacting groundwater quality in this program. But I do like your point about making sure that it also references, and is in parallel with what CV Salts is doing in the nitrate management, so that, you know, if you're complying with that, then you should be in compliance with this as well.
Yeah, because we got into it, not only the salts, the nitrates, but the salts, because we were arguing that at some point, farmers have got to flush the root zone.
Right.
You know, and so if you're going to flush the root zone, you know, you're going to push salts and whatever down, otherwise ag is just, it's going to go out.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's got to be some balance in there, and, you know, candidly, that was never fully resolved, I don't think.
Right.
It was just kind of like, okay, let's just manage the nitrates, and at some point, that's why the salt side of it got pushed out for the salt, you know, study. Let's give another 10 years before we really do anything on the salt.
Yeah. This is a tricky one because, you know, the State Water Board definitely made a big deal about water quality, and they, even in the workshop, one of their slides specifically said about their concerns with groundwater recharge and the, you know, and moving some of these contaminants down or impacts into groundwater quality. So we may leave it.
Am I allowed to have input here?
Yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry, jump in,
No,
please.
I just wasn't sure what the rules were here, so.
We're
No rules.
no rules. We appreciate your input.
Okay, well, the major issue that I wanted to talk to about this particular part of it is that I'm running drippers and my hoses are out in the middles. There's no fertilizers, pesticides, no nada in the middles. So my question is, when you're putting a 30-day policy in there, because I wanted to go through and do my pre-emergent herbicide, that's not going where I'm putting the water.
A good point, John. That's some kind of exclusion, depending on where the pesticide is applied.
Yeah, I was just making a note here. Sorry, John, I was just making a note to myself based on what you said.
I think we got to look at the difference between a pesticide and a fertilizer. This was aimed at the fertilizers getting pushed down.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but they could be concerned about some of these pernicious chemicals that we have too. I understand that, but what I'm saying is, those chemicals that we would be using for herbicides that may be more longer lasting are not going to be where I'm putting the water. And in my normal, back to the other side of that deal, when I do later in the season, like this coming late winter, I will be doing flushing, you know, for salts to move them out of the root zone. But that's standard practice for basically all agriculturalists. So I don't know, you know, I don't know how to address this other than the fact that for the time being, I got a limited amount of time where I have access to water, you know, probably about roughly 2 months. So I need to be able to carry on my regular activities of farming, which would be applying my herbicides to stop the early fall grasses. But like I said, the water is not going to be where that herbicide is applied.
So I think we can have some creative language.
Come up with some language to
for trees. There's a difference between, you know, flood irrigation, of forage crops and tree irrigation in operations. There's just a difference there, and somehow we have to capture that. in the language.
Right, and even if you're flood irrigating on trees, if you have berms, you're still not, you know, running the herbicide into the water at that point.
Maybe a mere wordsmithing, but change the word from field to land. That way, in John's circumstance, the land that you're applying the water to doesn't have the herbicide on it. So if it's up on the berm,
Yeah.
I'd call it the land that's getting wet is the stuff out in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my input on that. I have some other issues but as you go forward, Amir, and when you get to it, I'll put in again.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think
Yeah.
that'll clean it up.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, you know, we can't see everybody, if you've got a question, so anyone else who wants to jump in, please feel free to add any comments. If at any time, because we just can't see if I'm sharing my screen like this, we just can't always see everybody. So don't hesitate to jump in. Good point, John. Let me see what we can come up with and come up with some revised language. So the other part.
Can I ask a question real quick? Sorry, this is Eric
Sure.
Hansen.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, so based on the discussion, you guys, it's been mentioned that the state board's going to hold the GSAs liable for groundwater quality. What is the mechanism for the GSAs to police that?
Police groundwater quality?
Yes.
Yeah, so Eric, that's a great question, and that's the struggle we're having with the state board, because the only thing that we do have authority to police is groundwater extraction, right? Groundwater pumping. And so what we've been told is that if water levels are dropping and we're allowing groundwater to get worse, that's one scenario. The other one, of course, is if we're pulling contaminants in multiple directions, you know, we're allowing overpumping to pull a plume of nitrate or whatever in a certain direction. And the third item that they described was this recharge in what I've mentioned. And their belief, the state board's belief, is that the first two is us limiting pumping, and this third one is us having some policies in place to prevent groundwater recharge from causing those other impacts. So our ability to police it is really based on having good policy in place for the recharge issues, and then the state's expectation that we can somehow limit the pumping enough to prevent the spread of some of these contaminants, or if water levels drop, or concentration, if groundwater levels are dropping, and you and I both know that groundwater can drop into a zone that's naturally occurring for, you know, uranium, for example, or arsenic, and there's no way for us to know that in advance at every single location. And so these are the ongoing debates and discussions that we're trying to have with the state board staff, and you know, get their expectations to be a little bit more realistic.
And they're going to require more robust monitoring of groundwater for groundwater quality than I think we originally anticipated as well.
Yeah.
Well, and this is not creating a new law, this is just eligibility for the recharge credit, because there's gonna be farmers that put fertilizer on, and you gotta wet that to get it down into the root zone.
Right.
So, I mean, we're not gonna create something, you know, that we're gonna tell landowners, hey, you can no longer put water on top of fertilizer. I mean,
Right.
it's just,
Yeah, this is strictly for recharge credit,
Yeah.
right. Good point, Mike.
Well, Eric's question with respect to the mechanism on the quality, there was a legal matter here in Corcoran, a little bit east, where the city went after a local dairyman, claiming that their activities had an impact on the quality of the groundwater that the city was. Is what the state board doing? Is one party or the other gonna say, oh, it's the GSA's responsibility, and be able to just wash their hands? That seems a little out of line. That seems a lot out of line.
Yeah, I agree, Carl. Remember my original comment about how it is a very expansive read of what the SGMA law is?
It's a very wide paintbrush, too.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because, you know, that's where we're pushing back to the state, saying, look, that you already have, multiple groundwater quality programs in place, not just CV salts, but you have a whole regional board.
Plan is the
Yeah.
principal one, yeah.
Yeah, and dairy plans and all kinds of other things, and WDRs and all kinds of other permitting issues. And so we're trying to figure out how best to limit our responsibilities, and how the GSA is expected to coordinate with all of these other groundwater quality programs that are already in place and that have been ongoing. I will make the comment, and Eric, you probably heard this multiple times at that workshop, we're not responsible for anything before 2015. So if a problem occurred prior to 2015, that's not our responsibility, but they are holding our feet to the fire. Even if a nitrate problem was to occur and the CV salt program is not in place, their expectation is that the GSA would then be responsible for taking care of that problem until the CV salt takes it over.
Until it kicks in.
Yeah.
We're gonna stop gap.
Yeah.
That's their,
This to me is a
thought.
little bit like, all of the rules and stuff they put in place can't solve the problems or the unknown problems. So it's a little bit like when insurance companies couldn't cover the claims on the fire damage in Paradise. So they do a litigation, and all of a sudden they layer fire damage costs on top of the people paying for electricity from the PG&E.
Yeah.
It seems to me, at some point, not with respect to this policy, but we need to push back in the form
I
of
agree.
fighting hard. This is a huge open-ended liability. At any rate, I'll stop.
No, you're right. Eric, did I at least answer your question somewhat? I know it probably wasn't a satisfactory answer.
Well, I think yes. The short answer is basically, it sounds like all we can do right now is make sure that our policies stipulate that we don't allow for, you know, the mechanisms of contaminating groundwater when we're giving credit.
Yes.
yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Mayor, last comment is CV salts, remember, it was formed for salts, got hijacked by the nitrates, and so there's only the nitrates, or they have a nitrate management plan, as you're aware of, but they don't deal with the pesticides and all that stuff.
Right.
And the farmer's pesticide use reports and all that is supposed to be what's balancing all that. So
Right.
you're right. I mean, are we gonna get sucked into that and get, having to deal with every type of contaminant that's down there?
That's what I'm afraid of, and the way the board staff is presenting it right now, it's a very expansive read of that. And it's got us very concerned because, they are expecting mitigation measures, just similar to the wells going dry. They're also expecting water quality mitigation, and there's not this unlimited, sum of money that we can pay for this and that and everything else. So I'm this is one where we definitely need to be pushing back pretty hard on this one. Okay. Ooh, man, I know. I gotta give John plenty of time to get all his comments in. So, the next part of this recharge policy is, you know, in there, we actually had to define what we meant by the basins and the approved basins. And so, you know, we had said, hey, you'll get 90% if you have an approved recharge facility, and so we went through and wrote up some of the requirements that we would be asking for an approved recharge facility. One of the keys here that I do want to tell everybody is everyone has to be able to trust the credits that are being given out, especially if we're going to allow for trading of those credits. So if I give a credit to Stacy, you know, Carl has to be able to be comfortable that the same rules are applying to Stacy that are applying to him, right? And vice versa, and everyone in the basin. So that was a lot of what prompted this, is that there has to be a certain amount of trust that your credits are going to be given. We can review something one time, and then the GSA is basically saying, yeah, okay, you continue to use that recharge facility year after year. You know, we know that the system works, and you'll get that credit. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So we were looking for areas, and it has to actually recharge. If you're just detaining water, then and you're losing a lot to evaporation, then it doesn't make sense that you're getting a recharge credit for this, obviously. And that gets back to my point earlier, that if I give Stacy, I'm going to pick on Stacy because she's sitting next to me. If Stacy's getting a recharge credit, everybody has to feel comfortable that that recharge is actually occurring, and then we want that credit to be able to be traded, you know, between all of the landowners within the Tri-County area. So that's why we asked for the geotechnical report and the engineering's report. That's why we asked for the meters. There has to be, this is the minimum requirement in order to feel comfortable that this data set and the credit that we're allowing for this are actually occurring, and that the area is actually recharging.
Can I jump in now?
Yeah, go for it, John, absolutely.
All right. Well, you know, we've gone obviously to some substantial expense to create a couple of recharge basins, and you guys have just now, or in the process now of putting forward this policy. And so, you know, I sent a note about that, asking for some grandfather relationship or something like that, because we were proceeding with, you know, good intention. But the next question is with regard to the recharge actual, if I put my water in an 80-acre basin or whatever productive portion of it is, and I send you a picture of my starting meter reading, and when I get done with my meter reading, you know, if it ain't recharging, you're not going to get a heck of a lot more water in there. So I don't understand, you know, why you really need to go through the expense of, you know, geotechnical evaluation, because it's going to be pretty transparent, pretty straightforward what, you know, what you put in, and the evaporation prediction is pretty straightforward too. So, you know, I guess I'm asking for relief from that particular portion of it, because I don't think it's necessary.
You know, it's two things. I see this as two different things. I mean, if a entity does not want to in some way certify the basin so that we know what the percolation rates are and percolation is actually occurring, there's still the 75% credit in the policy that would be applied. But in in order to receive a full 90% credit, we have to have some technical documents for our records that prove up that basin. And I think you talked to Amir earlier. I know that you're already starting to put water on, which is fine. I think those studies can be done after, and we can apply it. But we have to have some sort of documentation on the basin. And I totally understand what you're saying, John, that, hey, whatever I put in there, and if I can continue to put water in there, it's percolating. And I think that's great. But the study and having that documentation here is important.
I'm going to make a snide remark right now, Deanna. My alma mater kind of picks me off sometimes about this. You know, I'll take straight math over a PhD analysis of of what we're doing, because what in and what you got out is very predictable. And as I said, the actual evaporation portion of it also is very predictable. So I'm just saying, I don't see a need for a study, because you've got an answer, a solid answer there. But I had to say my Nichols work, okay, but moving forward, why with regard to the 75% versus 90%, if I'm putting water into my field, if I understand through my drippers, it costs me a substantial amount of money to put that water into the ground, and then I'm being punished by 15% because I'm not sure why. Because I have less evaporation than any 80-acre reservoir that I'm putting water into for recharge. I would have much more efficient application with that water. So I don't understand why I'm being charged for the extra 15%, which is, and it's costing me a substantial more to do what I'm doing.
On Floodmar, John's saying on Floodmar, those two separate issues, one is the basin he's talking about.
He said he was putting it through his drip, though. I mean,
Yeah, but that's on Floodmar.
Does Floodmar work that way?
You can, as long as you're putting water on there, but that's not.
Where do you separate that from irrigation?
Yeah, that's where things get a little.
Yeah, I think we're.
Yeah, so John, the two separate issues, right? One is the dedicated groundwater basin, and that's where we're at.
I'll argue that point and agree with you on that. That's my argument. But then so if you guys can come up with a policy that would change that so that we would get credit, for the 90% rather than 75% when we're applying it, in the tree row with, what do I call this, flooding up with an irrigation technique that is much more efficient than plain flooding,
Yeah, see, John, that's where I think Deanna's point was, what's the difference between that and your water that you're applying for irrigation, right?
My water, applying under irrigation with a drip emitter, I'm going to say that I'm somewhere between 85 and 95%, depending on, how wonderful my system is. I think mine's 95%, but on flood irrigation, you're looking at a 65 to 70%. And so efficiency, right, on just straight flood.
No, but John, two separate issues. One is, for just the recharge credit, you're using your irrigation system as to take the water for recharge credit, and
yeah.
That's where how much of that portion is actually of that water is actually getting into the ground for recharge? How much of it is being used by the trees? How much of it is
well, the tree's not doing anything when we're doing it. Okay, the trees are dormant. They're not taking water up now.
I was gonna bring that up. If John applies water here in November or December,
Right.
the trees are basically asleep.
dormant?
And
Yeah.
so whatever he applies is either getting tied up, in the pore spaces in the soil, or it's finding its way
Right.
too deeper, to the recharge.
So how is that, Carl, how is that different?
Irrigation.
Yeah, how is that different than, any pre-irrigation that you're doing, and you can say, okay, do we have to come back and say it only applies to this crop in this timeline?
Right.
Some of it is stored in the root zone there.
Yeah, I don't see going through the emitters as recharge. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know any policy that calls that recharge in the San Joaquin Valley, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know.
I think the term is over application.
Yeah.
For that type of stuff, other GSAs are calling that over application, and they're not giving 90% for that, and that I've seen.
Right.
I think the over application is going out at 75%. In the Lower Tule GSA.
Yeah.
Eric, do you know, how are they how do they factor in, quote, the pre-irrigation from the over application?
Well,
They set some amount?
It's soil moisture holding capacity, and once you exceed the soil moisture holding capacity, the water's going down, and it's only going to move laterally just so far, and then it goes down.
But that's my
Yeah, but
question,
it's gonna be different for every field. In fact, it'll be different for every square foot. I think the way that that's being managed is they're gonna use ET, from their satellites to determine how much water the tree actually took up and utilize that number as a final figure. So let's say I put 4 feet of irrigation water on through the whole year, and the ET number shows up as 3 feet. They'd use 1 foot as their over application. Does that sound right?
No, I think that's a legitimate way to evaluate that. That's the same premise that I used on the recharge basin before, though, but you didn't want to accept it on the recharge basin, but it works the same way.
No, and quite frankly, I think it's better if we simplify this stuff, because the more we get into the weeds on infiltration rates and that sort of thing, I think the more there's gonna be trappings in that we need to explore.
Yeah, I agree, Eric. And, I'm just calling these things up because it's stuff that we need to investigate, right? So.
For sure.
and I would think, before somebody builds a basin, they're gonna do their geotechnical to see if it justifies doing it.
Yeah.
So if there's adequate monitoring, on what's applied to track the ETs, you're gonna know how much is going down, but I would be surprised if any farmer's gonna go out there and invest thousands of dollars building a basin and then,
Well, I'll make a point here that, just an anecdotal, in Lower Tule, we created a basin, because local, farmer required dirt for a levee. So they dug it out of a field, and now we fill it up with water without any geotechnical information. We started that process. We knew how much water the surrounding area was taking because we had already been using that for sinking even prior to Sigma, just because it's good, right? There was people doing that before because it was good for groundwater. And so I guess I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but there are situations that don't fit that goal. Not everybody's gonna go out and utilize an engineer, because quite frankly, I would agree, engineers are good and they are expensive. And so whenever we can avoid using those kinds of things, if we can, we do, right?
No offense.
Eric, let me clarify, because I wasn't saying you had to do that, but for a farmer doing it, they're gonna make their own investigation one way or another. In your situation, you knew it, but somebody just going to buy a piece of land, they're gonna take some soil samples and all that to see if place where you could sink water.
Yeah, I would say,
Absolutely.
there's you were talking about two very different areas. Lower Tule has a very different soil, composition than we have on the west side. And having, recharge on the west side is different than the Lower Tule area. And that's why I think it's probably, if we're being real honest, 75% recharge on the west side is fairly generous. And to get to 90% and having to have some sort of documentation behind that 90%, I think is probably something that we would need in order to pass the smell test.
What are you doing with the extra percentages though? That's the part that kind of baffles me. You're saying, oh yeah, we're giving you 75%. Where's the other 25% going?
Well, if 75% is actually recharging, that would be fantastic. I mean, this is what I'm trying to say. I mean, those are still pretty generous numbers, and the other 25% would go to the whole of Tri-County, and hopefully to the benefit of water levels.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll add, John, I'll add for Deanna that even if it even gets there, it's not a scientific 25.076%.
Right.
But it's some gets tied up in the soil, some never finds the groundwater. We don't know what it is, but
I don't
Myriad
personally,
System came up with that number.
Well, if you look from Kern County north, there's some art and there's some science. I mean, everybody has different numbers, and some of them you're putting in a bathtub, and some of them you're putting it in a slow-moving stream underneath that it may move out.
Right.
That's where all those numbers have.
Yeah, we don't know if it's gonna make it to groundwater or not. That's the real question, right? It may go in the ground, but it might go down and perch at 25 feet or something. It may never make it to the actual groundwater table, and that's the thing. Without some level of understanding, we just don't know that. And that's why we're asking for the report. John, Dan brought up a couple different points. We are not mandating how the investigation is done. That's between each landowner and whoever they retain to do that work. And by the way, I do want to point out to everybody that our firm is conflicted out, so I'm not. This isn't the America's going to get a new boat type of thing. I just want to be clear on that.
We had that discussion. We're good. I'm just bringing these points forward for clarity.
Yeah, I just wanted to be
And
clear.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with Deanna's comments. I mean, certainly there's areas out that you can sink water, and it may go down into the ground. But if you intend to use that particular water in locations, when you pull it back out, it's going to be different, and it may not be usable.
Well,
Eric, I was going to raise that point because there's areas that, again, but going back to CV Salt's days, and we looked at, quote, the salt sink, where you got, and we did the de-designation areas because the groundwater is not usable. So in this policy, I don't think we ought to allow is sinking in something that's not usable after, and then you got your wells pumping, taking away where everybody else is. We're trying to have a sustainable, usable basin. Right. So I think there's got to be some criteria wherever you're sinking this. It's got to be usable groundwater afterwards. Otherwise, you're putting it in, an area that's not usable, and you're taking that credit out in an area that everybody's trying to manage.
Right. It's a fine line.
Yeah, but you can't control that. I mean, only if I'm putting water, I mean, I'm being brutally frank here right now. Any of this water that we're putting down out here in the Alpa area, or frankly any place else here in the valley, where is that water going? And you're gonna have to spend a lot of money trying to figure out whether your water really was usable or not usable. So it's this part of the recharge deal is kind of sketchy. But I'll be honest, I would prefer to take advantage of it because, you know, it will help me as far as managing the farm operations that I run. So that's.
But I can tell you, John, we looked at areas that you got 20 to 40,000 in your TDS or your ECs down that southern lake bottom that the water's not usable. And it's sandy soil and you can park a bunch of water on there, but no one's gonna pump that out and use it. So that's where, you know, how would you allow somebody to park a bunch of water in there and then they pump water, say, okay, now I'm gonna pump in a different aquifer and use that, and then it's to everybody else's detriment when you do that, you know, to give credit on something that's not usable.
I'm not arguing.
Yeah, these are, so I will say, look, we can't, you know, the policy doesn't cover every single land, you know, possibility or, you know, of all the geology and everything else that's out there. We try to come up with something that is a good guidance document. We are trying to average some things, as I think as Eric and Deanna kind of said. It's not perfect, but it is, and again, it's still a draft. So the board ultimately needs to consider this, and you guys are all raising some excellent points that I would highly recommend that you put in writing or come to the board meeting on the 7th and express those concerns to the board as well. And the board, I think, needs to hear some of these, you know, how much discussion is going on on this topic as well, because it sounds very easy that, hey, let's just come up with a recharge policy, but then you start getting into the details like you guys are, and I think that's important. Let me, in the interest of time, because we do have a hard stop at 11, let me talk a couple of other items real quick. The over-application of floodwater is the next section. And again, this is one of those things where it's very hard to come up with a policy of one size fits all. And so basically what we're saying is for over-application of floodwaters, we're basically saying, hey, quantify the amount of water that's being applied to your field or, you know, from the flood, and then provide some supporting documentation, and very similar to this year, staff will review and try to come up with you know, a credit. If you guys want us to try and come up with some more details on that, we can try and do some things, but floodwaters are, you know, when it comes, right? As you all are very painfully aware of this year. And then finally, just one last thing on the indemnification. I think I wrote the word district everywhere. Just strike that, and we'll be replacing that with GSA, of course. So, because, you know, as you can tell, I lifted this from a different document and just kind of dropped it in there, and I forgot to change everything to GSA. And then lastly, there are some definitions on the last page. I used the definitions that DWR uses, and this is directly from DWR. If there's something else that you would like me to define as part of this document, please let us know that as well, and we'll make sure that everything is as clear as we can try to make it, and, you know, with clear definitions for all the different water sources. John, I know you didn't probably get satisfactory resolution on this meeting, but I would encourage you again still to, you know, your emails are good, you know, from last Friday, and we'll be, you know, make sure that that's, the board is aware of those and of your concerns, you know, based on today's comments as well. But I would encourage you to, if you got any other thoughts, either put these thoughts or other thoughts down as well in those emails, and we'll make sure the board's made aware of your concerns.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And by the way, December 7th is Pearl Harbor Day, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, just throwing that out there. One of my favorite days.
We're gonna flag and split it that day.
Yeah, we always, yeah, this time of year, it's always, tough to try and figure, dates for everybody that works, especially between the holidays and all the tons of other meetings that we've got scheduled. We've still got about 10 minutes. Can I ask anyone else, Eric or anyone else, if you had any concerns? John, if you had anything?
Amir, I had a question. This is Alan.
Oh, hey, Alan. Sorry, I didn't realize you were on.
Yeah, I was just on mute the whole time. My only question, which I asked you last week, was if we do the study after the water season is over, will that suffice?
Yes. You can definitely do the study. Deanna and I talked about this. You can definitely do the study afterwards.
Yes. So
As long
75%
as you have
credit.
that stamp from the engineer, you're good. We get the 90%.
Yes.
Okay. Clarify that. That's my only question.
Okay. No, good. Glad you're able to make it today, Alan.
Disappeared again. I think he muted you.
Yeah, sorry. Hey, I'm back on mute.
Hey, Eric, did you have any other thoughts or anything that you wanted? I'm only calling out because I know you clearly have read this and you've been very active in this.
I need to review it. Unfortunately I didn't do my homework last night.
It's all right, Eric. I know you got a few other things going on, right?
Well, I'm not gonna make any excuses. You can't trap me there.
Bastian, anyone else? Anyone else have any thoughts that they want to share with us? We still got a few minutes here.
Amir, I have a couple.
Sure.
Some of them are like wordsmithing.
Oh, yeah.
You refer to water purchase a lot in the intro and then in item 1. I don't think it should be limited to purchase. It could be water you're already entitled to. It could be water that you say, I make water available, Angela makes water available to somebody in exchange for water back. So just water that you've secured, and I think that's too limiting.
Okay.
And number 3, this is a pet peeve of mine. Meter. I think you want the water to be measured.
Yeah, so number 3, we do say it's required to be metered or another standard measuring method.
Yeah. Okay, well that's, because I know where you have metered, they're required to be metered. I go measured utilizing a standard or a method approved by.
Yeah.
I just think we all talk about meters like it's the only thing. I know we're not supposed to have conflicts, but it looks to me like we're getting kickbacks from the meter manufacturing companies. I'm being a little sarcastic intentionally, but the meter. A lot of times meters are a poor way to measure the water.
Yeah.
There are far better methods.
I'll make sure that on recharge basins, we have something that, where, again, on page 2, where I talk about the meter, that it has the same language about, or approved, or standard, another standard measuring method.
Can I
So you can do it here.
Can I interject on that? If we have meter
Yeah.
and our meter dies, are we going to be allowed to mathematically, estimate the amount of water that we were using in lieu when the meter was not in service? So as an example, say we were on, day 25, the meter dies. We know how much fuel we used. We know how much, how many hours we had our pump running and what have you. So, or the diameter of our pipe and the head over the pipe, so we can always, estimate when the meter is not servicing properly. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we do, John. I think, we'd like to as long as there's some measuring device that we can all agree on, I think that's,
Yeah.
you know, we're trying to be as flexible as we can, but we also, like I said, want to have some faith in all the numbers that we're giving.
Yeah, but you yourself brought that up, was that, you know, meters
Yeah.
are, it was Eric, but somebody did that, meters are not infallible, you know, and over the years, I
Right.
can tell you that.
Right.
No, I'd like to comment on the meter dying, you know, they do, and trash gets in them, that sort of thing.
Right.
It seems like that you could utilize the information you have before and after. I remember dealing with the PG&E when their meter broke.
Right.
Fortunately, we had water meters, and what I always succeeded in was took the time period before or after, and the kilowatts, you know, per acre feet. We should be reasonable. If a meter dies, as long as they get it fixed in
Yeah.
whatever a
Yeah,
reasonable
reasonable
period,
time, yeah.
you utilize the data you have. You don't pull a number out of the clear blue sky, but
Right.
you utilize the
Right.
data you have to make a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're being punitive.
Yeah, we don't want to be punitive.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, yeah. We don't want to be punitive.
Does that sound reasonable, John?
Yeah, no,
That
that's,
approach.
I just was bringing it up because I hadn't really, you know, thought about it until it was brought up there, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've been through that a few times, and PG&E is not the only one that I've had that sort of a discussion with, and yeah.
They used to be
Okay.
reasonable. I don't know if I can say that today. The PG&E, that is.
No comment.
I'm not sure I've ever heard someone use PG&E and reasonable in the same sentence before.
I did say used to be.
You did say used to be, yeah. Next thing you're gonna tell me the railroads are reasonable.
No comment.
Carl, did you have any other, you mentioned the,
I'd written a note on the why 75%, what was the basis, but I think we talked about that extensively.
okay,
On that fourth bullet, I have your measure, your device to measure. And then, what, I should know this, but what is passive recharge versus active, I assume is the other kind?
well, if passive recharge means, let's say we just fill up a basin, water recharges into the ground. We're not doing, injection wells, we're not doing something else. So I think that's why we use the word passive.
Thank you. I guess I needed that.
Yeah.
All right.
Like direct
Direct
with a
recharge.
well or something.
Yeah, direct recharge, which is less direct than indirect recharge. Maybe
Yeah.
that's part of my issue right there. Okay.
Again, this is one of those things where I was talking about definitions earlier. Sometimes, you know, it's important to define some of these terms just so that there's not a question later on. Okay,
Yeah, Carl, I had one other.
yeah, go for it.
On number 2 on the first page,
Yes.
in that last line, sole expense, I think maybe put responsibility because you've got all costs establishing, and it may not be their sole expense, they may have grant money or somebody else partnering. That just means all the costs of doing all that will be the responsibility of the landowner, however they do it.
It's the responsibility of the landowner,
You
for
said
sure.
it's not the responsibility of the GSA.
Yeah.
As long as everybody's clear, it's, you know, it's not the responsibility of the GSA. Yeah,
Still left the word sole, so it's sole responsibility.
yeah. Yeah, it is the sole responsibility of the landowner. It is, yeah, the GSA will not be, contributing to that. Okay. Susan, any thoughts?
No.
No?
Educational.
Kathy?
Yeah, very educational.
All right, in that case, thank you, everybody. Short meeting. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and hope you all have a wonderful holiday. And John, I hope you get a chance to take a few days off here.
Yeah, well, we will. It's my favorite
John's got
holiday.
40 people plus coming to his event, so I think
Wow.
I'm gonna sneak in. John, you won't even notice one extra person.
Yeah, we're kind of got a large one going, but normally every year my family is between 25 and 40 people.
Wow.
Yeah. Good. Enjoy, John. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. We'll see you on December 7th.